So I just finished a 6-month container with Angela, my guest, called Soul Speech. And Angela is a genius around many things, but nonviolent communication is the modality you bring forth and embody in many ways. And it was through this 6-month container that I got a real deeper, I feel like I just dipped a toe actually into NVC.
In 6 months.
In 6 months. I dipped a toe into nonviolent communication, for those that don't know what NVC stands for. And I am blown away at how much untangling what my feelings and my needs are has been really helpful to help me understand more about myself and my entangled messes I can find myself in, and to be able to take the structure of NVC to untangle more of what's at play and to see the layers and to recognize the feelings and the needs, and then to be able to learn how to make requests from the recognition and clarity I gain from that has been extremely helpful. Something that I find interesting, so nonviolent communication, for me, communication has always been hard. And having grown up in a way where everything was fine, we didn't have to communicate about much and we didn't have much conflict.
Yeah.
I remember having one fist fight with my brother. That's it.
Yeah.
So there's this like desire to communicate more, but more also a desire for me to understand myself more. And yes, somatically, I know myself really well, but understanding more of feelings and what is it that I'm actually feeling and what is it I'm actually needing feels like a newer thing that I'm moving into. And Rio snoring, so you might be able to hear him snoring in the background. Just noticing his nose is right by the microphone. But yeah, there's this real clarity I'm gaining through what I've learned from you that I'm extremely grateful for, that has really allowed me to see more of the puzzle pieces that are at play around how I'm showing up in the world and then how I can communicate it. And what I find so funny, being someone who didn't experience much conflict, is as soon as I signed up for this, I had so many situations that were conflicting and where I really had to practice this work. And some of the most challenging experiences, like I had a friendship that ended because of some conflict, navigating some pieces with clients. Like, it's amazing how when you open the door to it, it comes your way. So be warned, anyone listening to the podcast, you might, after this, start navigating more of your feelings and your needs, and maybe also navigating conflict. So without further ado, I'd like to actually hand the mic over to you just to share a little bit about your NVC journey, anything you want to share around how it's helped you, and how it continues to help you. Let's start there.
Thank you, Nicole.
And Angela Walkley. Welcome.
Thank you, Nicole. I think what's just sticking with me right now is your experience of opening up to your feelings and needs and finding that you're landing in more conflict than you used to. And that could be just circumstance, but I think it can also be that when we get more connected to what our needs are, we start asking for things that we haven't asked for before. And instead of just going with the flow or going with the easiest route, which tends to be what other people are putting in our path, we start to create our own pathways, and we have to move through more friction.
Totally.
To do that.
Totally.
So yes, I do appreciate the complexity that comes when we start to step in to living really in alignment with responding to our feelings and aligning ourselves with what our needs are. And then the other step of that is, how do I align that in a way that other people can hear and other people can receive? So that's the nuance of it. It's like, okay, here's me and here's what I'm needing in the world, and how can I tap into who you are, what you're needing in the world, and what the sweet spot is in between.
Love that. Holding more grace for each of us in the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my own journey started because I was working as a mediator and a facilitator, usually related to land use planning decision making in Canada's north. And I thought that this would be a really great tool for me to sort everybody else out.
That's not a pattern, is it? There's a survival pattern?
Yeah, there's a survival pattern, maybe. Yeah, that's definitely a hint as to how I ended up in that work. I think that's a natural role that I played from a young age, but it also was representative of like the neutrality that I always held within me, just my ability to see this kind of multi-partiality of the world, that there was something going on for everybody. And so there wasn't a right or a wrong to figure out. There was multiple needs to be figured out. So I think from a young age, I was really motivated that way. And then got into this role of trying to seek really great decisions for establishing parks, creating decisions around how land is used, managing our social services programs, things like that. But what I really quickly found was that it started to work on me and in me. And the consciousness that I was trying to bring around multipartiality in the outward world started to show up in my inner world as well. And like I started to notice the frequency with which I held myself wrong.
Right. How dare it reflect back at you.
And also in my primary relationship, my close friendships, my relationship with my parents, and I was a new mom. In fact, like I took my first course in nonviolent communication when I was pregnant with my son, who's now 19.
Wow.
So so I did not have the chops at the beginning to really understand how shifting out of right-wrong thinking would dramatically upturn how I thought of parenting in terms of my top-down, like, here's what I say, you need to do it, kind of approach. Like, okay, time out if you're not gonna, finish what you started or do what you said you were gonna do or do what I told you to do. Just the radical transformation of like any behavior that's showing up, whether it's in a child or whether it's in an adult, is stimulated out of a need. And so as soon as that paradigm flips, it shifts into a curiosity of like, so what need is going on?
Yeah. It instantly creates space around what's going on.
Yeah.
And brings on this curiosity of like, let's look at more perspectives or understand from more perspectives.
Yeah.
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 Beautiful.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that I tolerate or that I accept harmful behavior or that I let go of my own needs mattering.
Yeah.
Just because I can tune into somebody else's needs doesn't mean that I let go of mine.
Yeah.
It's this simultaneous curiosity about the other person's needs and then tuning back into like, oh, and what am I needing?
Yeah.
Oh, I have a need for this. And how important is that need? And in what ways can I get it met?
Yeah.
So it's getting very creative with how we meet everybody's needs.
That's so cool. And what that makes me think of, like, coming into the pillars of NVC, what you're naming here is recognizing someone's needs, and in that is we're observing them, right? Like, there's observations being taken in, and something that I'm aware of that I can do personally, and I witness other people do, is we make stories up or assumptions around what people need or what people think or what the situation is.
Yeah.
Right. So this recognition of someone's needs, but noticing if we're making assumptions around needs, or are we genuinely getting curious and wondering about what their needs are based off of what we're observing, but not holding on to what we're observing as the fact or the thing that I have to associate to when I'm trying to figure out their needs.
Yeah. And there's so much innocence in the ways that we make up stories. Like, we're meaning-making creatures.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we observe something and then we analyze it. Just, the automatic process of analyzing that for meaning and then coming up with a story. And because we're born into kind of a right, wrong, blame-oriented culture, there's a natural inclination to notice negative feelings and put that back on to the other person and create a negative meaning making around what happened.
Which I want to just name because I look at things more from a survival pattern perspective. Like that can be a brilliant way that someone's learned to survive in the world.
Right.
It's like if I can read the room and I know what that body language means, or if I know what, that look means, and I am then prepared on how to navigate it so that things don't blow up, right? There can be a real survival aspect to how we take in information and make stories of it. And of course, everything's based off what we've learned, but when it's rooted in survival, it has a very different quality to it. And then that assumption making and then turning it around and potentially blaming or turning it inward and shaming really starts to take place.
Yes.
So I wanted to name that, just kind of to notice flavors. And we'll get into that later too, of like when something's rooted more off of survival. I mean, everything's rooted off of survival. We're always trying to survive.
Yes.
But when it's rooted in a story that's stuck in survival, that's going to really impact how we observe the world.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing in that is that there's a natural inclination to meet our needs for safety as like the number one place to start.
Yeah, exactly.
And then from that is also like care for myself and watching to see if others are caring for each other and caring for me.
Yeah.
And so that's a really natural strategy for us to have, is to be vigilant and to look for stories where there could be threat. And when we've had past history of being unsafe, that's going to be amplified. We're going to see it more often, and we're going to be more vigilant and more likely to project a negative story on the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And the challenge is that we treat that story as if it's truth.
Yeah.
And then we often frame it from that blame paradigm, and then we demand what it is that we want out of it, or we don't actually demand it, but we expect it. And when we don't receive it, then we're angry about it.
Exactly.
And none of that has been communicated.
Yeah, exactly. So I wonder if you're okay to kind of, let's follow this in a way, because to me, what we're already describing here is more when something's rooted in trauma,
right,
versus when we're just genuinely in our explorations around what we're feeling, what we're needing, and how do we make requests from there. So I want to just speak a little to that first, and then we'll speak a little more to the rest of the foundation of NVC and how we can kind of differentiate when we're more in what's rooted in trauma versus when we're finding clarity. And it's not always obvious. Right. But what I'm hearing in what you're saying is like, yes, there's this need for safety and care. And in that, for me, what also stands out is connection and a sense of belonging and mattering.
Yeah.
And when there's history around not mattering or not belonging, or when the care was never there, or when safety is hot and cold and you never really know, you're then in a state where, yes, you need it, but you don't even know what you need because it was never necessarily there in the first place.
Yeah.
And this is where I find it leads to people being more in the story making and the demanding because they can't meet themselves in that yet.
What I'm hearing in that is the inability to know what it would look like for that need to even be met.
Yeah.
And without knowing that there's a defensive mechanism that just shows up of like demanding strategies to create that safety, but without actually having the full awareness of what's happening and what you're actually asking for or wanting.
Totally.
Yeah.
And for now, we'll just leave it at that as an invitation for people that are listening to notice, if you recognize that as we're continuing to talk about feelings and needs and any requests that kind of come out of that, when is there a flavor of demanding it from someone else because actually knowing how to meet yourself in it is unknown? because that's just information. It's almost like another way to get to know yourself in the ways that maybe there's some missing pieces here, or I'm stuck in the unknown of these needs. And that's something to get curious about.
Yeah.
We can leave it out there for now.
Yeah.
I think you and I could probably go on quite deeply into the deeper realms of that, and I'm sure it'll continue into the conversation, but I just wanted to name it as something for us, me included, to continue to be aware of when the needs we're making are kind of foreign to us.
Yes.
Because they're probably rooted in trauma.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What I feel called to do is make this more relatable by grounding it in practical examples.
Yes, I love examples.
Okay. So I mentioned to you before the call that I had a conversation with my dad this morning and noticed that I had some needs were really alive, that it weren't totally clear for me at the beginning, but I think I'll use that as the example. And I want to say at the outset, as I go into this story, that I'm really clear that there's nobody at fault in this story. And at the same time, when I first start into experiences, sometimes I can't fully see what my reality is versus the other person's reality. Like it's sort of like a bit of a detective game in terms of like figuring out what is actually alive. See if I can make it in simple terms. I received an email this morning. This is my observable. So just as neutrally as possible, I received an email this morning that was from my dad, and it was linked to a bank arrangement that I'm doing in the purchase of a house.
Great. So an observable being what you are, the scene is being set as this is what's happening, but there's no attachment to a story to what you're observing in.
There's no added layers of evaluation. Or any kind of sense of something being done wrong. It's just the facts that there was an email that was sent. And I had an immediate reaction because I had been the primary point of contact, and that this is an arrangement where I'm the primary client. So I had the first feeling I noticed was surprise. And the surprise showed up as like holding my breath, and kind of a bubbly adrenaline feeling immediately coming up into my body, almost sort of like going into an immediate sweat.
Is there nervousness in the surprise?
Yes. Yes. So it's not just a neutral surprise. It's a charged surprise of worry. Like there's sort of a concern and worry around there being potentially a harmful impact. And I knew instantly that there was something that I wanted to tend to quickly, because of the time sequence of things that were taking place today. And so I got on the phone with my dad. And there's something that happens for me, there's real value in processing before we get into contact with other people. So there is something that happens for me very quickly around like, oh, what is it I'm longing for here? And there was a very quick realization around wanting autonomy, wanting choice, the word that came up for me was dignity. And I think that's just a word that comes up for me in the ways that I long to be my adult self while in relationship with my father. So it's something about like allowing the ways that I love that he supports me, and also retaining connection with my agency as my adult self. So those needs were alive for me. And at that point, I wasn't able to connect to what his needs were in sending the email. And there was threads of stories for me around, here's my dad trying to take leadership of something that is my responsibility. So that's, I think, as far as I kind of went and didn't dig under in terms of my own curiosity of what was going on for him.
Because there was a time limit, or
because there was a time limit, and there are times when I choose to ride the mobilization that happens for me with emotion, because I have a tendency to self-process and contain. Like, I process to such an extent that I've got it kind of figured out, and it doesn't always give people the transparency they need around how we are in relationship with each other.
Yeah.
So I do invite myself to not overly process. And maybe that's just something that's developed over the 20 years where I realized that I was losing intimacy with people because I was processing things to such a degree that they wouldn't even be aware that there'd been a charge that came up. And I actually enjoy being in a little bit of the heat of the relationship with people, even as much as I want to reduce drama.
Yeah. Well, and through that, it probably creates more connection and intimacy. Maybe.
That's what I would hope.
Right?
That's what I would hope.
And I want to name, as someone who's been doing this for so long, this is an easier practice for you. Not saying it's, I'm sure, always easy, not that I want to assume that. But for someone who's newer to this, like for me, who it's a lot, like I still have to look at the cheat sheet to look at what am I feeling right now? And that's where I find this work so valuable, is like hanging out with other people that are also trying to figure it out and like reflect or make guesses, but that it can take some time to recognize what you're feeling or what your needs are, and then to also pause and notice when we're making up stories or making guesses on the other person without actually having a conversation with them.
Yeah. And I think that's where I caught the hesitancy in my voice when you asked the question of like, well, why is it, that you went directly into the call? And I'm like, oh, right. Because I actually would love to teach people to take the pause, like to take the breath, to do the journaling, to do the question of like, what am I feeling here? What am I needing? And then even just take more space to be like, I wonder what needs could have been going on for the other person, in this case, my dad, what needs could have been going on for him that I'm not seeing in the first glance.
Yeah.
That if I spent a little bit of time, in this case, looking at the words of the email, I might be able to figure out.
Yeah.
So that by the time I call, I have really done a good job of unhooking from my story.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I'm connected to my needs. I'm connected to the potential of his needs. And now I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably still have some heat. Like we often carry with us some heat. But there's something about just being like, I actually don't know the details of what's going on.
Yeah.
In so many circumstances.
Totally. And what that kind of, to weave in some of my language, the way I experience that is like, okay, when I'm shifted into, for your example, this surprise and worry and nervousness that's there, I might find myself in more of a vortex where I'm not clear with my thoughts. It's harder for me to decipher my emotions or what's at play. So having that opportunity to pause and notice, what am I experiencing? And what patterns are showing up here? And like you're suggesting, taking some time to journal. I know in nonviolent communication,
if you've got that space,
if you have the space, right? There's something called jackling, where it's like let's just jackal out everything that's in the room, all the different realities that exist, all the different parts that exist, so that it can be weeded out and there can be more clarity of like, oh, there's this, in my words, this survival pattern or these needs or these feelings, and I can pan out and come at things from this place of wholeness and understanding of all the pieces, not all, but most of the pieces, some of the pieces that are at play. And then I can have the conversation from a very different place than when I'm in the vortex.
Yes.
So when I'm in it versus when I pause and notice and give myself some time to untangle more of what's at play or see more of what's at play, I can have a conversation from a very different place.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that you brought in the jackal, because I think there's such a tendency, and I think there's a lot of modalities out there that shift us quickly out of our place of activation and into sense making.
Yes. Yeah.
And so one of the things that
calm yourself down.
And one of the things that I love about jackling is it allows me to learn stuff about myself that I might have skipped over.
Yes.
And so jackling is this like free permission to not unload it on somebody else, but to allow myself to express, whether I'm talking aloud to myself, or whether I'm writing, or whether I'm just flow of consciousness, letting myself sort through my thoughts, but not making any of them wrong, like really inviting those voices in so that I can learn about stuff that I didn't know was important to me, or that I didn't know had some imprint from previous experiences.
Yeah.
So
I'm laughing a little because one of the first times we hung out, I don't know if you remember, we were in the van driving back to the ferry.
Yeah.
And you were explaining jackals to me. And I was like, I don't have jackals because everything's fine. Like, I get over it so quickly.
Right.
I don't have the jackling. I don't spiral into the thoughts and shame myself or, because it's like, everything's fine. I don't need to. I'm right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's learning more about listening to the underlying layers.
Yes.
And giving more space for that has been really helpful to see more of the perspectives that are at play that I often shut down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's something soothing too for those inner parts that have a chance to be fully heard and expressed in those moments. That in fact, when we let those jackals out, when we let the jackals howl, that might be completion for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
That might be the work that needs to be done to tend to our needs. So maybe to give a conclusion to my story. So I did phone and I shared and I spoke immediately to the needs that I mentioned in terms of autonomy and choice. And I think also around collaboration. And I quickly realized how this was putting my dad into a place of defensiveness and wanting to be seen for his intentions. And so because I was holding my needs, I was able to hear that he and I had a miscommunication.
Yeah.
And he had picked up on it, and he knew that there was urgency to it.
Right.
And he also knew that we were talking about numbers and complexity.
Right.
With numbers.
Yes.
And that is not my strong suit. And that I believe he also realized that he had tried to communicate something to me in the past that I wasn't getting. And so he was wanting to be as proactive as possible to make sure that it was articulated in a way that reflected the reality, in a way that I might not have had the capacity to do.
You see numbers very differently, and he had something to share with you to support your learning around.
Oh, he's got so many gifts in this and so much experience, which I really appreciate. And so I was very quickly able, or at least relatively easily able to shift into seeing that his email going out was a reflection of his care and his support and his concern and his need for clarity and order and safety.
Yeah. Yeah. And those came through having the conversation with him.
Yes.
Right? You're not making assumptions about it. It's very clear.
Yes.
After talking, because this is where I think, at least speaking for myself, if you don't have the conversation, you don't really know. And I can make up lots of stories.
Yeah.
But by really having that conversation, it creates more understanding.
Right. Yes. Yes. And as I got the understanding of what was going on for him, my nervous system just starts to melt. Because even though I try not to get hooked in story, until we know the reality of what somebody else is experiencing or what was going on for somebody, we are stuck in the emotional response to the impact versus connecting to the needs that were alive, the intent that was behind those, the strategy.
Yeah.
And even if we got to a place where like if I got to a place with my dad where, let's say, his primary need was for safety and I didn't really agree that his strategy met that need, it still allows me a release in my nervous system to be, he was tending to a need for safety in a way that was really important to him.
You have empathy for him and understand him and where he's coming from. Doesn't mean you agree,
right?
But there's space to have empathy for him and be like, yes, and this is my experience or my need around this.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And in this instance, and I'll have to go back to my recollection of how I came to it, but the natural request that comes out of this for me is kind of following an acknowledgement and appreciation of what he did to care for those needs, is to add on, for next time, would you be willing to run this by me first? And then we could send it together jointly, because that would also meet my needs for collaboration and connection, in addition to autonomy, choice, my own sense of clarity and understanding.
Yeah.
So that's where the request comes in, because of course I went in with an expectation that he would do that.
Yeah, right.
And yet there was no clear request. I had not made a clear request for those things before that.
Yeah.
And so it's only through sorting through moments when somebody doesn't meet your expectations that you're like, oh, we didn't have an agreement around that.
Yeah. Next time
there was do it different. Next time, can we do it differently?
Yeah.
And so the shift between staying angry about somebody not meeting your expectations is that instead of piling the responsibility on the other person for it, I'm staying with the responsibility of making the request to achieve what I'm wanting to have or what I'm wanting to get to.
And recognizing the request is just a request, that they can say no. Otherwise, it's a demand. When you drop that, I was actually in the car with my dad on one of our calls.
Yes.
And you named that. And I had to like tell my dad right away. I was like, Dad, just so you know, the difference in between a request and a demand is when you request something, someone can say no. Or when you demand, there's an expectation or
Yes. I mean, one added layer to it is, how do we just give ourselves permission to hear demands as requests?
Yes.
So that we're always giving ourselves permission to say no.
I love that. So if something feels like a demand, I can pause and notice. It feels like someone's demanding something of me. How can I back away from that a little and see it as a request and notice myself? What is this really that I want to say yes or no to? And then noticing what comes up at the idea of saying no. Yeah. And there's more survival patterns that probably show up around saying no. Yes. And to be able to notice that, right?
And so one of the shifts that can be done around that is, if I notice that I'm not in agreement with the strategy that somebody suggested. Yeah. Like somebody suggested something or asked me to do something, and I notice there's an immediate no to it. What I can get curious about is there a way for me to meet the need without agreeing to the strategy, which can be easier for our nervous systems to move away from, like, I'm not saying no to the person.
Yes.
I'm not saying no to what their needs are. I'm saying no to, not at that time, not that particular activity. Like let's say it's like a friend asked me to go to a movie tonight, and I'm feeling fatigued and I don't enjoy the movie they've suggested.
Yeah.
I can say no, but I can say, but I would love to do something with you when I've got the energy and when it's an activity we'd both love to do. Yeah. And maybe that's a really simple example, but it's
also simple is easier to start with, right? So when someone's making even a request and you all tend to always say yes to things, even when you don't necessarily want to, there can be that opportunity in the easier things to pause and notice, like, oh, I feel like I should say yes. Wait, it's actually a no. How do I notice the no inside of me? Yeah. Okay, now with the idea of saying no, it equals I'm a bad friend. They're not going to reach out to me again.
The layer on
like all the meanings, all the vortexes we can find ourselves in. Then it's like, oh, wait, I can find a solution here to still maintain connection, not move myself into my shame spiral, and make suggestions that allow me to stay in connection with this person and not have me feel shame for saying no,
Yeah.
or feel forced to say yes. I love that. Something stood out to me that I wanted to speak to in what you were sharing with your dad, which is you're able to have the conversation with him.
Right. Yeah.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
I don't, there's many conversations I want to have with my mom and my dad as examples, because that's just where we're at right now, but many other people as well, where I will just freeze. So the idea of sharing what I'm feeling and what my needs are and making requests, it's like the idea of just talking to this person.
Yes.
I instantly feel my chest tighten, my jaw clench, and I start losing clarity of thought, and there's no way I could move towards taking action. Yeah. So, of course, that's going to be more rooted in trauma and the entanglement of what's coupled into me talking to someone and the fear of the consequences that are involved in that. But I wanted to name that just as we practice discovering our feelings and our needs and learning how to make requests and have conversations around what it is. Like, practicing this is like so hard. So just naming that, if someone's curious about like, okay, diving deeper into this, to also notice like this isn't easy. It isn't easy to have conversations and show up in these vulnerable places, especially when the people we might be talking to don't have any of this language online, which I'm imagining your dad doesn't. Maybe he does because of what you've modeled. But yeah, anything you want to name around that of like.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. And the first piece that I want to catch is when the other person doesn't have the capacity to hear us. We're bringing our truth forward, bringing even something from a really deep place of self-connection and groundedness and care would still be triggering for somebody. Yeah. And I think when we notice our nervous system tense up and hold fear and the need for safety in those moments, it's not necessarily trauma. It's information.
Yeah, it's always information
on our lived experience with this individual that is letting us know this person may not have the capacity to be able to hear what you have to share with them. And so that's where discernment comes in around, what does this person have the capacity to hear? Am I able to translate it in a way that they can hear? Can I use words that I know they relate to? Can I use contexts or ways of speaking that I know that they can relate to? And if not, then my work is to do it elsewhere.
I love that.
And so the work elsewhere can be empathy for myself. It can be doing, like with a friend, just being like, this is what I was so wanting to say to my friend or my dad or whoever it is. And the act of saying it creates a completion loop for us. When we're holding on to an energy that we're just really longing to have the opportunity for expression, to do it with a friend, allows our nervous system to settle as if we had done it with that individual.
It's moving through the cycle, moving through the experience and landing back in connection, back in safety, back in, I mean, it doesn't always need to be safety and connection, because if there's a rupture and an ending,
that's right,
you know, that might happen too. But
that's right. So that's the other part, is to notice when I'm repeatedly facing the result that the person I'm with doesn't have the capacity to hear my truth, then how am I choosing to be in relationship with this person? And am I choosing to be in relationship with this person? And for what reasons?
Yes.
And I think there is something about family, is that we choose to remain in engagement with family for all the needs that are met, even when we're still holding the needs that might not be met, like around bringing the whole expression of ourselves forward.
Yeah.
So,
because there's that much more history there that meets other needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate you naming that, because I have a feeling many people out there are connected with their family, but wonder why. Right. Where it's like, why do I still stay in this relationship, or why, you know, but there's something deeper for us to inquire into, of like, well, which needs are actually being met here that and to honor those or to bring more light to those, we're
Yeah.
recognizing, okay, these needs will probably never be met. How can I go get them met somewhere else?
Yes. And just to bring my transparency forward, this is a constant learning journey for me. Like with my conversation with my dad this morning, had I taken more time to get really grounded in what was going on for me, I think he would have had a much easier time listening to me.
The defenses
and hearing,
wouldn't have come up as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would have loved to have brought more care, particularly knowing how much he loves to contribute and how alive that energy was in our dynamic. And I find that heartbreaking.
Yeah. That you can celebrate it with him.
Yes. Just like how much I want him to know how much that matters.
Yeah.
And it makes me teary talking about it, because when I connect to people, and when I connect my dad around the places that he has, you know, so much love to give and this way of giving it, I want to be able to receive that and hold my own stuff with care and find that sweet spot of how can I bring the maximum amount of truth forward with the maximum amount of care.
Yeah.
And it's this constant dance of like, where is that sweet spot of truth and care?
And sometimes hard to find.
And sometimes it's hard to find. Well, and maybe that's the thing, is that there's no right formula.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we're constantly finding that within ourselves and within our relationships with other people.
Yeah.
And there was just one other piece related to your example of when it brings too much fear up within ourselves. That's the other piece of discernment, is just our own capacity.
Yes.
Because we could be talking to somebody that has full capacity to hear our honesty.
Yeah.
And yet our discomfort with past experiences and other circumstances lead us to have limited capacity.
Yeah.
And in those situations, I think it's a matter of holding that with care and understanding. And there is the potential that I practice it with somebody else first. I get comfortable with it. I play with it. I get creative, and then see if I can bring it to somebody.
Exactly. So that's where what I do weaves in, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, notice this pattern of like, I don't have capacity here. I'm pausing and noticing that this is really challenging for me. And how can I start to get more inquisitive about the ways I'm getting stuck, or I'm freezing, or I'm dissociating, or whatever it is, whatever patterns are involved with speaking up or expressing what's there for me. It's like, oh, okay, I get to pause and notice and deepen my awareness around the pattern and discover maybe a little bit more of what the underlying belly pieces are, usually the trauma, the place where stuck in that threat response cycle. And then how do I start to support myself more from this place of wholeness and holding the compassion and care for the reasons why this conversation is hard, or these conversations are hard. And that's what I really enjoy. Like, there's a lot with NVC that also works alongside how I work, where it's like, how do we have empathy for ourselves in the ways we're showing up in the world and these patterns we're stuck in, or empathy just for ourselves and our feelings and our needs, because we're humans and we have feelings and needs. So
I really appreciate that as well. The ways that the embodied explorations of past experiences and traumas adds a deeper richness to looking at our needs. To where do these needs become activated habitually, and from where did that first start, that those needs? Because often when I go back, like when I notice a need, even for something just really inconsequential, it will, if I have had a reaction to something that's kind of inconsequential on the surface, it's because, you know, there's so much history. So can I start to be in relationship with my needs, where I'm like, oh, funny, that need for belonging is up again. You know, in this small moment, oh, right. That's that need that I'm just continuing to try and tend and care for, and not dump on every relationship that I'm on, is to meet that need for belonging, because it's an empty pit that you're never going to be able to
fit. Because I never belonged in the first place.
So I'm going to try and
belong
get
in
all of that from you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really important for us. Again, my pausing and noticing is where I'm always practicing, is like,
Yeah.
in my need, when is it rooted in some history?
Yeah.
And when is it rooted just in the dynamic that's at play?
Yeah.
And for me, it's important to recognize, like, when the need itself is reliant on someone else, or I'm hyper independent.
Right.
So here's this
Yes.
spectrum that we can
Yes.
find ourselves in with our need. It's like, I'm depending on you to meet my need.
Yes.
Or I'm independent and I don't need anything from you.
Yeah.
And that's more of my experience. Like, if I think about having a conversation around my dad or with my dad around something, it moves right back into, well, I'm fine and I can do this myself.
Yeah.
And if I dig deeper, it's not okay to be needy.
Right.
Right? Like, being needy is my story, there's a root in there of like, I have to be in my independence. The neediness is what I need to do more inquiring into. Like, how do I actually be needy? That scares the crap out of me. Right? So that's my end of the spectrum, whereas other people are going to be more
How
needy.
do I allow myself the vulnerability of
and the
being
riskiness
interconnected and being interconnected with my needs? Yeah.
So as that softens, there's more ability to be in the riskiness of more vulnerable conversations, whether it's with my dad or anyone. But there's that, for me, that's my end of the spectrum. I'm more in the hyper independence, whereas other people might relate more to the neediness and depending on other people to constantly be meeting the needs because they didn't ever have their needs met either on the other end, right? And it's more of the reaching versus the pushing away. So I just find it so fascinating to pay attention to the quality of my needs. And then that provides me with more information of what kind of history they might be coming with. And then I can hold them a little bit and practice still making requests around my needs being met with people where it feels safer to do so, where there's more of a willingness to be in the edges of the neediness. And support a change in the story, right? To almost support a rewriting to happen, like, oh, I can actually receive here and I'm okay. And supporting what wasn't there, or whatever reason the lack of needing is there, gets to be rewritten. So I just love, like, the more I can see the history, the more I can play with my edges as the adult here, finding what else is possible. If I don't have that awareness, I'm going to probably still show up in my history a little bit more.
And the pattern of tending to needs you put yourself versus putting a request out there. Or even versus the vulnerability of letting people know you have needs.
Exactly. An ongoing practice right now. To be on the edge of the vulnerability of that. So I have one more piece I want to weave into this conversation. And it feeds into what we just talked about, in that, as my hyper independent person, I can often be villainized. And someone else who sees me or is met with me in my independence might feel it like they're the victim because I'm not meeting their needs. Right. So if someone makes a request to me, I might back away and be like, no, don't need me, and then I'm more of the villain. And then that person feels more like a victim. And I wanted to speak with that a little, adding in the layer of the helper as well. Because I find it's easy for us, at least when I learned about this, it was easy to identify and recognize, like, when I'm more of a villain and when I'm more of a victim. And when I'm also more of a hero, which that's not one of my, like, this to me is like the survival patterns, right? Not either, because we probably can relate to all of them, but I can relate more to being the victim or the villain over the victim and the hero. So I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. Because it allows us to pay more attention.
So the villain, victim, hero is not the original language, but it's the language that I play with around Cartman. This comes from Cartman's drama triangle that he put out in 1968. And the idea is that rather than taking responsibility for our needs and identifying needs in others, we tend to ping pong around either being in the victim role, where we feel that somebody else is to blame and that we've been wronged, and then we cast somebody else as the villain in the story. Or we get into sort of more martyrdom of like, I've done everything right. I've worked so hard at this. I can't believe that you're bringing this small issue up, given everything I've done. So again,
You're to blame.
I'm blaming, I'm still casting in the villain role, that I kind of toggle back and forth, either being like, I can't believe you did that to me. I've done so much. So I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between being the victim and being the hero. And the thing about the drama triangle is that there's no winner. We're constantly trying to win the game. Of who's to blame, and the winning of the game is like, I wasn't the one that was wrong. And the other person is doing the same. And as we shift places on the triangle, we just continue to rotate around it.
In a way, it's a power dynamic, or that can be an aspect of it, is this constant power dynamic we can find ourselves in. And this dance that we can do in between shaming and blaming, and how easy it is. I'm going to speak to it more from the pattern perspective and what I feel somatically. It's like, if I blame someone else, I can be protected and stay okay. If I take it on and I'm really moving more into I'm the victim, I live in that shame and I carry it all. And the way I notice it in people is like, when you lean more towards shame and taking it all on, there's this getting smaller, there's this spiraling in the victimhood. There's this, I'm wrong, I'm bad,
and the self-imposed villain as well.
Exactly.
Like our internal drama triangle, where we're
villainizing ourselves. Thanks for naming that. Whereas those that are more in the villain, my body's changing. I'm standing upright. I don't do wrong. I take up more space. I'm more assertive. Don't mess with me. I'm protected, so nothing hurts me. Right. And they're less likely to move into any shame or take responsibility or even move into that victim quality. And I find that's important to recognize, because then we can see those that are like live life and move through life in more of that quality, versus those that are more in this quality of like getting small, hide, stay quiet, don't speak up. There's so many layers to our experiences, but it's kind of one end of the spectrum or the other. And I find it really helpful to see people in those dynamics.
And just to be clear, that what we're ideally trying to do is step off of the triangle entirely. So that I think of it as stepping into the middle. It's sort of choosing to exit the game. It's not even playing the game differently. It's like, I'm actually not going to engage in this game, because there's no answer that can be found to the questions. That's the wrong questions. And so instead of playing the game of who's right, we're playing the game of curiosity, of like, what's alive in you and what's alive in me. Where do we have a shared experience, and where do we have a different experience, and what can I learn about you in the process, and how rich it can be for me learning about me in that process as well.
I want to name that we haven't named really much about the third piece of the drama triangle, which is the helper, to also be stepping out of.
Right. And maybe that's because the way that I play with it, I'm playing with it as villain, victim, hero. And so
so I'm not helper.
I'm not bringing, and the helper from my perspective is the martyrdom. Is the martyrdom role. And so the toggle in what I most frequently see is moving back and forth between victim and hero, while casting the other person as the villain, and then them doing the same. And then that curious thing that happens, if you ever have the chance to play with this, is stepping from when we're locked in that gridlock of
Yeah.
the drama triangle, how completely energy shifting it is to step into the middle and be like, actually, I'd just like to know more about what was going on for you in that moment, because I can see that there's something that really matters to you. Like that I can see that there's an emotional response that's happening for you. Like I can see that you're mad and I don't totally get it. And so I just love to know more. And so you're no longer playing the game.
Yeah.
The second that you ignite your curiosity, you may still have the person being defensive because of their ability to trust, but that question immediately takes them out of the place of villainizing you.
Yeah.
And more into them and what matters to them. And I think that's the framing, is just this, like we use the word needs, but it's fundamentally asking, like, what really matters to you? Like, what's the song in your heart that's singing around being seen, or around mattering, or around belonging, or back to belonging again.
It's a big one.
It is. Mattering and belonging are often big, but also, appreciation, care, support, like
collaboration,
whatever
mutuality.
it is that matters so much. If you or I were in conflict, just being like, well, something really matters to you.
Yeah.
And so instead of me negating that something really matters to you, can I fold that in? Can I fold that in and be curious, not taking it on, not like, oh, it's my job to make sure that you get your needs for belonging met.
Yeah. But just to acknowledge that there's a need here.
Yeah.
And
that matters to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if you have a need for belonging, that matters to me. And so it opens my heart, not necessarily to make me set all my life aside and to tend to you and caretake you.
Yes.
That's not what I want. But I want your needs to be present.
Yeah.
For me to be able to hold them with care and say, I see that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, like, it gets us into the kind of more space of I wonder if, like, what could we do to make each other's lives more beautiful in all of this?
I love even just the invitation to step out of the triangle. For me, I instantly feel space. Like I took a breath when you invited that. And there's a sense of like, oh yeah, right, something else is possible here. And it reconnects me back into myself and with the other person in a different way, with my environment in a different way.
Yes.
And there's just this like, oh right, here I am with these needs and these feelings happening, but there's more space around them versus just being in the vortex of this dynamic.
Yeah.
And I think even for me, just knowing like, oh wait, can I pause and notice, and like I'm in this dynamic, and can I step out?
Yeah.
And maybe the cue is after I step out, like, hey, I'm noticing something really matters here.
Yeah.
Can we have more of a conversation around this?
Yes. And it can be that it can be very difficult to step in to the curiosity about what's going on for the other if we don't first step into the curiosity of what's going on for ourselves. So just to name that can be really challenging to stop and just get curious about the other when we're activated.
Yes.
But that is the magic.
Yeah.
That is the transformational magic of, instead of waiting for the other person to get curious about us, is can we choose to step in first?
Yeah. Well, and what comes up for me is like I might be able to step out and ask a question, but if I step out and share what I'm feeling, the person might not be ready to hear it yet. They have to step out first too. So by stepping out and asking the question first on how, like, what something matters to them, it's like, oh, it could be the opportunity for them to be seen a little bit more of like, oh yeah, something does matter, and actually you're giving me a moment to actually speak to it.
Yes.
And so this dance of like stepping out, acknowledging, wait, I've got some stuff to unpack here and untangle, while also creating that space for them to, not that the agenda is to have them step off of that triangle, but to create the opportunity for that to happen.
We're longing for connection in all of our relationships.
Yeah.
Or we're longing for safe connection in all of our relationships. So the potential is that we're inviting people into that.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And if they have the capacity,
yeah.
then we create that opening and that opportunity.
And then we're back in an interdependent relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where empathy becomes so available, and their collaboration becomes so much more available, and just being in that interdependence.
Yes.
Like, oh,
yeah. And
I think
that interdependent energy can exist even if the other person doesn't have the capacity to go to empathy.
Yes, good point.
That there's something about the energetic shift that can happen when I tune into you, even if I'm longing for you to tune into me in the same way. And if I can hold that awareness that you might not have the capacity to go to the same place, I can sit with the mourning. Like, there might be some grief there around not being met in that. But if I can hold that and then just notice that we've shifted. Yeah. And then I mean, we've got a changed atmosphere, I guess, that we're sitting in. Yeah. And then the question is, can I now invite us both to get our needs met? So I might not be able to be fully heard in the way that I would like, but I could ask. I could even say, like, oh, it's been so great to hear what's going on for you. And I think you get me. And I wonder if you just tell me like one thing that you got out of listening to me. So I could ask for that. Yeah. Yeah. And then I could say, and so what could we creatively do? Like, knowing where we're at differently. Yeah. Working in collaboration to try to find solutions. Yeah. 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 Solutions yeah. Yeah. And when the sweet spot for me, when I notice that I'm in it, is often when it matters to me that you get your needs met as much as me getting my own needs met. Like, that's when I know I've shifted. Yeah. It's beautiful. When I am lobbying for you. Like, I might have started off in the drama triangle where I am like, that's such bullshit. You always, need to be whatever it is. Like, you always need to get your way. And by the end of it, when I'm like, I actually want not that you get your way, but I want you to have your needs met. Yeah. When I feel that, like, I am cheerleading for us all to get our needs met versus railing for mine. Which is what you expressed when you talked about your dad. There was that shift into really recognizing and actually mourning, not entering the conversation already celebrating his needs. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And given the nature of my relationship, I think to all people, probably like my own patterns of relationship, bringing my vulnerability and my emotional reality forward is a gift to myself. I love that. Versus having processed it all and showing up with, I'm guessing your need was to contribute here. Yeah. It's like, if you just put yourself to the side. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not to say that, like, you can choose to hold that. Like, if I can choose to hold that and not bring any of that forward. And there's just a piece of discernment around what would be in best service here. And it's not always going to land, no. But you practice. You practice. Like, I think it's just this thing about expanding the spectrum of what we're able to do in relationship. Like, that I have increased, like, the ability to increase our literacy with each other. Like, that I'm like, oh, I've got competence to show up in this whole range of topics with this whole range of people. Yeah. Whereas in the past, my capacity was like this big for this many people. Yeah. So the bigger we can, like, we're giving ourselves the inner freedom, like this inner freedom of expression, of being whole and being ourselves, and knowing that if something puts us into a place of threat, we also have the skills to say no, to meet our needs, to connect back. Yes. So it creates this resilience as well. Yeah. So greater spectrum of how I can show up in the world, greater spectrum of people I can show up with, greater spectrum of topics I can show up with. Yes. And the resources to take care of myself. And like accessing a lot of the tools that you bring forward in the work that you're going to do, that you do, even amplifies that. Yeah. To reducing the repetition of our habitual patterning, and healing those places. Yeah.
And what stands out to me in that is like it's ongoing, right?
Yes.
The edges that we get to explore in where we're slightly uncomfortable
Yeah.
continues to be there.
Right.
And that's what challenges us to increase our capacity. The more we can learn to meet the edges and explore within those edges, and it doesn't have to be this big edge. Like, I don't have to go have this deep heart to heart with my dad right now.
Yes.
But there's these
Yeah.
ways I can explore the edges of that with him.
Right.
And feel slightly uncomfortable and
Yes.
see what happens and what evolves out of that.
Yes.
Right. So, and that's what continues to increase our ability to have more conversations
Yeah.
with more people about more topics. And
Yes. Yes. And I think also choose very specific strategies for different people we're in relationship with. So that I think what I've found is that students will always often anticipate that my stories are that all of my relationships are very open, very transparent, like that we've achieved a place of like loving transparency and can hold vulnerability. That's not the case.
Yeah.
The case is that in all of my relationships, I'm navigating my own capacity and I'm navigating the capacity of the people that I'm with. And I may have a very limited window that I'm capable of connection with for certain people.
Yeah.
But rather than focusing on trying to bust that wide open and make the relationship include all, I find ways to celebrate the space that's open and continue to connect in those places. For those that I've chosen, like family in particular, that I want close. Yeah.
I love that.
And not expecting every relationship to meet all needs.
Yes,
like
exactly.
To really be clear that in this relationship, I get this whole set of needs met. And wow, does that ever feel good? And for the needs that I don't get met in this particular relationship, I do with this friend or with this family member.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. There's so much to learn through all these practices, that's for sure.
Yeah, I noticed that my like heart's racing with it all, and that I have this sense of aliveness and also fullness and maybe a little bit of like, oh, there's a need for grounding for me right now. And
well, we've dove into a lot.
Yeah, thank you for opening the door to it all.
Yeah, I'm excited to have the door be opened for more people.
Yeah.
Resources. I know you're planning on doing potentially another 6-month container for soul speech in the fall, maybe even a couple. Those are involved in person, so it's
they do. So it does mean people that are able to get to the west coast of Canada.
Yeah.
But for those that are able to get to the west coast of Canada, it's a series of 3 4-day retreats in person.
They're so rich. Yeah.
They're pretty,
great opportunity for learning and finding those edges of the vulnerability and exploring through practicing with other people who are also learning. So just really supports those opportunities to practice and be messy through it.
Yeah, I think in the 4 years that I've run these immersion programs, they create a container for people to build relationships in so that they can process in real time.
Yes.
Things that come up. So, and then in addition to that, there's weekly calls, both teaching calls as well as empathy calls. So you're paired up with somebody to practice with throughout the 6 month. And then the other resource I would suggest is that if people are curious to know more, you can go on to the Center for Nonviolent Communication website, which is cnbc.org.
And we'll link it below too.
Great. And there are international intensives that are 9 days long in all parts of the world. And those are incredibly rich experiences, just really deep dive.
9 days of talking about your needs and your feelings and your needs. Woo!
Yeah. Yeah. And building community and having these tight home groups that work together, as well as the learning. And then there's also a full list. There's a map on that site that will link you to nonviolent communication trainers around the world.
Cool.
We are very active in many, many parts of the world, in many, many different languages, lots of written resources in different languages. And then my website is my name. So it's angelawalkley.com.
Great.
And that's where I post what I'm up to.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for the ongoing learning and for the friendship where I get to also ongoingly practice and also have you model with me. I've learned so much even just through our relationship and the way you approach me about things. I remember this time where I was supposed to come meet you for an event, and I already was having hesitancy about going to the event, and I ended up having car issues, so the car issues solved the problem for me. I didn't have to go. And you approached me and let me know how disappointed you were because it impacted the group, it impacted the container. And that thought didn't even cross my mind. Right. I was just like, well, I don't feel like going, and the van broke down, so I'm just not going to go. And to have you approach me and share what you were feeling around it, and that certain needs around being in connection with me and deepening our connection, and being in collaboration more, that wasn't going to happen, that really impacted you. And it really opened my eyes to be like, right, my actions impact other people, which I of course knew, but not in relationships where I got to have conversations about it. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity for ongoing learning with you and ongoing friendship and deepening the relationship we have together.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, it's very mutual. I really love what I learn when in relationship with you, and also because I've been had the benefit of your sessions as well. Yes,
here to the ongoing learning journey. Thank you. Right.
All right.
Thanks everyone for listening, and hopefully the resources and the insights that you get through this take you to deeper places.